Hi, this is Paul McGuire. A spiritual battle rages in America right now with just as much intensity as the firefighters in California battle the raging flames of destruction, where tragically many people have lost their homes, people have died, and hundreds are missing. Looking at the brute force of fire traveling at the velocity of 80 football fields per minute. I've lived in California for a long time. I've never seen this in my entire life. We're going to have a Paradise Mountain church meeting this Thursday, November 15th at 6 p.m. to minister to people, and I invite you to come. You can get more information at paulmcguire.us. This fighting of the fire is somewhat symbolic of the intensity of the spiritual battle for the heart and soul of America. That battle is just as intense as the fire battle. In fact, it's more intense because America is at the crossroads right now. We are in the most intense battle for the hearts and minds of mankind, and the outcome of this battle will affect the entire world. And we have to understand, as people that call themselves true believers in Jesus Christ, people who claim to be members of the supernatural body of Christ on earth, we have been commanded by Jesus Christ in the last days, and we're in the last days, to occupy the land until he comes. That means we're to spiritually occupy the land with prayer, evangelism, fasting, preaching of the word, and to not allow evil and the forces of evil to topple God's call for America in the last days. A lot of Christians don't seem to understand that God has a special call upon America for the last days, especially in relationship to America's function to bring in the last days soul harvest in the last days. You see, America was founded by Pilgrims and Puritans who entered into a covenant with God in the 1600s that was based on the covenant that the children of Israel entered into God with in Deuteronomy 28, the blessings and the curses. That's the reason that God supernaturally raised up America above all the nations of the earth, economically, in terms of our Constitution, our Bill of Rights, our freedoms, the very concept of an American dream, our military victories. America was prospered as no other nation in history. In fact, America is the only nation in human history that ever had a large-scale, prosperous middle class, where the ordinary man could work hard, keep stuff that he worked for, actually own his own home, and expand his or her wealth. America is the only nation on earth that has a constitution and a Bill of Rights that guarantees every American citizen rights like freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of religion, and what it says in the Constitution, that the Creator, capital C, God, has given us certain inalienable rights such as life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, the legal document which guarantees this unprecedented freedom here in America is a totally unique legal document because it anchors all the freedoms to the fact that it is the Creator, it's the God of the Bible that gives mankind all these inalienable rights. That means they're given to man by God, and they're not allowed to be taken away by some bureaucratic, petty, power-hungry government. That's very, very important. America's Constitution and Bill of Rights is the only legal document of governance which acknowledges the fact that all of man's freedoms come from God and they're not allowed to be taken away by some kind of tyrannical or totalitarian government. When you study, as I have, the legal documents that govern the European Union, the legal documents that govern the United Nations world government, the United Nations documents and the European Union documents are very similar in that they're essentially, they use slightly different verbiage, but they're the Declaration of the Universal Rights of Man. But when you read the various promises and freedoms line by line, in both documents, as I read their line-by-line freedoms, I can't help but notice that there are specific lines in both the European Union Constitution, if you will, and in the United Nations Constitution and human rights sections. What I perceive is deliberate trickery, deliberate deception, and I'll explain what I mean. First, both of these organizations, which are organizations created by the globalist elite, not to benefit mankind, but for the benefit of the globalist elite. And let's get that historical fact put in its proper place, because it's true. The entity called the European Union, with all the rights allegedly guaranteed to Europeans, and the United Nations documents allegedly guaranteeing rights to world citizens, if you look at them carefully and you look at the history of both movements, the UN and the European Union, they are in no way written for the benefit of the common man and the ordinary person, as they masquerade and pretend to be. The European Union and the United Nations is written very clearly not to benefit the ordinary man and woman or the global citizen. These supra-institutions are written to increase the wealth and the power of a small percentage of globalist elite at the expense of the common man and the ordinary citizen. In other words, they're deceitful. They are instruments of trickery and deception. And as you read line by line, you discover there's all these promises that sound like our Constitution and the Bill of Rights. You know, freedom of press, wow. Freedom of religion, wow. Freedom of this, freedom of that. Sounds just like the U.S. Constitution and the Bill of Rights. But as you go down lower on their lists of freedoms and qualifications, you run into very problematic and disturbing and totally contrary information. You will read passages in the UN Declaration of Universal Human Rights, and the same thing in the European Union, that if you dare to criticize, for example, the UN or the European Union, if you dare to criticize the way it's governed, if you dare to criticize its philosophy, if you dare to criticize its programs. Now, I'm not just talking about criticizing it like in the media or a blog site on the internet or on a radio show, on a TV show. The way the language is written, if you're caught talking to somebody who's a friend privately and somebody overhears you or somebody rats on you, or you're talking to a family member and they rat on you. In other words, if you're having what you think is a confidential private conversation that's non-public, but you're caught criticizing either one of these institutions, the EU or the UN, all of a sudden, the whole thing flips on you. You can be prosecuted, arrested, thrown in jail, and fined retroactively for committing a crime which is criticizing anything about the UN or the European Union. In other words, it's a complete hoax. You're given all these freedoms, so like you're euphoric. But if you don't read the rest of the language, should you dare to use the freedoms that they just told you you had, and they told you you had these freedoms with no strings attached, but you go down further in the list of either document, you discover that if you're caught criticizing or saying something negative about the European Union and the United Nations, that you can experience the severest criminal penalties. You can be arrested, you can be jailed, you can be fined retroactively, and these are not light slaps on the wrist. You can have all your property, all your retirement, all your money retroactively seized from you, and you could be thrown in jail for the rest of your life. I mean, that's not an exaggeration. These are hardcore penalties. And the thing that's most disturbing is you may say one or two things, and if somebody reports you, you lose all your benefits, your retirement, your property retroactively. Now, this is done deliberately. They're betting on the fact that the average man and woman, the citizen of the world, that they claim to be the champions of, because they claim to bring about true social justice for all. They claim to provide an environment for fair wealth redistribution and fair social justice, and to build a workers' paradise, a heaven on earth, a state that is totally fair to the common man, where there'll be no super rich and there'll be no poor. Everything will be equally redistributed. But when you scratch beneath the surface, what you see is brutal, fascist, dictatorial, totalitarian governments. That's exactly what you see. It's just hidden, because they're betting on the fact that the average person who's been scientifically dumbed down won't really pay attention to the fine print in their legal documents. So when the day is done, you discover that the European Union and the United Nations legal documents, legal laws of the land, their land, are completely different than America. And what they are really is they're structured by the globalist elite to put all the power, all the money, all the wealth, all the control in the hands of the globalist elite, and the globalist elite will rule the masses via the European Union and the United Nations like dictators. So here's the thing. This is not the case with the United Nations. Now, given that reality, and it is reality, notice how all of the globalist elite, the heads of the UN, the heads of the EU, are all unified in their attack on Donald Trump. That the migrant caravan is not just some spontaneous uprising of migrants who are unhappy with their living conditions in Honduras and Guatemala. In fact, it's been financed by globalist elite billionaires in the United States and organized by professional, revolutionary, demonstrator organized, financed by billionaires in the United States. Notice also that U.S. taxpayer dollars, that's your tax dollars and my tax dollars that we pay to our government, a significant percentage of it gets funneled right into the U.S. State Department. And the U.S. State Department, behind our backs, because of course the media never reports this because the media is owned by the globalist elite, the U.S. State Department then takes our taxpayer dollars and finances the entire migrant operation in South America and the caravan. So the UN is financing this revolution being brought to the borders of America. The organizational structure, the transportation, the thousands of tents I saw, very expensive tents, all paid by the UN, all the UN working with radical leftist organizations on the ground there, the UN sending their experts and agents to create this revolution, if you will, at the borders. It's a clandestine operation using taxpayer dollars, the State Department funneling the taxpayer dollars to the UN, and the UN being a covert agency to destroy America as an independent sovereign state by flooding America with millions and millions of migrants with the specific intention of destabilizing America, its values, and breaking America from its Judeo-Christian capitalist consciousness, so that America can be destroyed and put into the puzzle piece of a globalist totalitarian government. You think that's far-fetched? Well, let's look at the European Union, because they're using a PERA strategy in the European Union. You have, because of globalist billionaires, highly trained activists, secret money coming in from the United Nations, and secret organizers funded by the United Nations. They have been stirring up militant Islamic extremists, especially males of military age, have been coming into Europe to the tune of, I think it's a total of 5 million people in recent years. So millions and millions of illegal migrants who hate the values of the European Union are flooding the European Union as part of a covert globalist operation involving the globalist elite, globalist billionaires, and United Nations. And what they're trying to do is they want to flood Europe with so many people that have a hostility and a militant Islamic extremism to destabilize, to break, and to shatter the European Union sovereign state consciousness and culture. They want to obliterate any sense of European or French identity, British identity, German identity, Italian, Spanish identity, Scandinavian nations identity. They want to obliterate it by overwhelming the populace with people from nations that despise Europe and European values. Why are they doing that? That is a strategy of shattering the Eurocentric consensus and creating situations of violence and demonstrations that will give permission to the globalist elite and the secret rulers behind the European Union to establish a totalitarian dictatorship and mass surveillance. Do you see what's happening? Same plan is being used against the United States of America. They want to bring in reality, 6 million migrants who are simply pawns in this globalist operation. Why are the globalists doing this? Let's not be naive. By the time you finish watching this series, you'll know the truth. The globalist elite, which represent only 8 to 12 of the richest international banking families of the world, they secretly rule the world through shadow governments. It is their game plan to create a global dictatorship by conning the masses into saying we're creating a benevolent, kind, friendly world government. It's all a lie. It's all propaganda. They want to control all the money, all the power. They want total lockdown. That's why they've been planning for mass surveillance on every continent in the world. Since the late 1800s, they've been planning mass surveillance. The cybernetic communications technology that began at the Macy's conferences and before, This mass surveillance technology began in the 1920s, for crying out loud. Brzezinski wrote about it in his book, Between Two Ages. He wrote about the fact that a globalist elite would establish what he called a technotronic dictatorship, which was very similar to the words of Aldous Huxley, who said the elites want to establish a scientific dictatorship. And Brzezinski said, in this technotronic dictatorship, we're going to use psychotronic weapons, that's electronic weapons, on the population and mold them through mass mind control. And then Brzezinski said in his 1976 book that we are going to create a mass surveillance grid and keep files on everybody for the purpose of control and retrieve those files whenever necessary. Do you understand what's happening? The Bible predicts this. You read the book of Revelation. The beast system run by the Antichrist, head of the one world government. The second beast, who's the false prophet, who heads up the one world economic system and the one world religion. The global government, global religion, global economic system with the mark of the beast 666, mass surveillance grid, computer to brain interface technology. What used to be called sorcery is really now scientific mind control. All of these are the secret weapons of the Antichrist, spelled out in detail in the book of Revelation, and it's converging with geopolitical, technological, and scientific events in our time. You need to know the truth. I'm Paul McGuire. Visit paulmcguire.us. As a further resource to help you understand what's really going on, because knowledge is power, and you can't, if you're going to be dumbed down, you're going to be victimized. I strongly encourage you to grab a copy of my book, Conquering the Matrix. It will explain to you in simple, powerful terms how you could be under the influence of a hypnotic trance state, hypnotic programming, or even some kind of scientific mind control. And then if you recognize that after reading my book shows you principles about how you can set yourself free, your children free, and others free from technological mind control, hypnosis, and other means of inducing kind of a hypnotic programming on people. You need to set yourself and your children free. Get yourself a copy of Conquering the Matrix, and then on a global or national level, these same technologies of mind control, persuasion, and indoctrination can be used and are being used to generate a mass awakening. This hysteria you see among the millennials and the socialists and the radicals. Notice how they're so mobilized, they're hysterical, their rage is off the charts. They're one step away from an armed revolution. How did they get whipped up into such a psychological hyperfrenzy? They've been exposed to scientific mind control, propaganda, brainwashing. You need to understand this. In my book, Mass Awakening, I talk about how technologists and scientists can create this hysteria that leads to violent revolution. And that's in my book, Mass Awakening. At the same time, Mass Awakening talks about how God would desire to create a third biblical great awakening among his people for righteousness, for love, and for peace. And a biblical third great awakening can happen if we operate according to God's principles. Both options of a mass awakening are available to us, but we will choose whether we'll have a mass awakening for good or evil. Get yourself a copy of Mass Awakening, and finally, make sure you get yourself a copy of A Prophecy of the Future of America. I deal with the Illuminati music videos that are programming people. I deal with the Nazi rocket scientists and brainwashing scientists who came to America under Operation Paperclip, invited by the CIA during at the end of World War II, and how they promoted mind control all across America. And then I talk about Charles Manson and his involvement in MK Ultra and how MK Ultra was used in high-level people in the music industry. And I prove it. You need to get yourself a copy of these 3 books. They'll change your life. They'll empower you. A Prophecy of the Future of America, Mass Awakening, and Conquering the Matrix. They're at a special sale price, discount price. Visit paulmcguire.us. That's paulmcguire.us.